7 days after Paul arrived in Jerusalem, the Jewish people were already looking for a reason to persecute him. They claimed that Paul taught men from everywhere against the Jewish people and the Jewish law and the Jewish places. We see that this is a fabrication of the truth, because later in verse 24, Paul is saying to Governor Felix that he agrees with everything that the law says, the law being the Torah, and everything that is written in the prophets. Therefore, we can see that it is clear that Paul is not teaching people away from the Jewish belief, but instead that the Jewish belief is correct, but missing an important piece of the puzzle: Jesus. We can see that Paul does not withhold from any opportunity to share the gospel, no matter what the situation looks like from the outside. As Paul, it would be like if we, as a class, thought in order to be a Christian, we had to go see the new James Bond movie. And Yemima stood up against this and said, no, you don't have to go see the new James Bond movie to become a Christian. And the class broke out in such chaos that we wanted Yemima out. Then in the heat of our uproar, our beloved Professor Mitchell Moore walks into the class and takes control of the situation. As our professor is removing Yemima out of the class, Yemima turns around and asks if she can address her fellow students, and then continues to address us, trying to convince us of the same thing that got her into this situation in the first place. This makes many people upset with Paul, and they form a plot to try and kill Paul. But by God's grace, Paul's sister's son overhears this plot and runs back to the barracks to tell Paul. Paul sends his sister's son with a centurion up to the commander to tell the commander this news. And it is because of this new information that the commander transfers Paul to Caesarea early in order to foil the plans of those who wish to kill him. When Paul arrives in Caesarea, he was confronted by Governor Felix. Paul again gets an opportunity to defend himself by speaking the gospel to Governor Felix. Through his defense, he testifies that he agrees with the law and the prophets of the Jews. It was before Felix that Paul made the statement that it was concerning the resurrection of the dead that he was on trial, referring to the resurrection of Jesus Christ as Lord. Felix, however, did not release Paul, and instead held him for a span of 2 years. Throughout these 2 years, he would send for Paul and talk with him frequently, because he was hoping that Paul would offer him a bribe.
After Porcius Festus succeeded Felix, 3 days later, Paul was sent in front of Festus. And there were the chief priests and Jewish leaders who appeared and requested Festus to send Paul to Jerusalem. They wanted Festus to send Paul to Jerusalem because the Jewish people in Jerusalem were planning to kill Paul. But Festus, not listening to the leaders and the priests, he sent Paul to Caesar, and he himself went with Paul to Caesarean court. After Paul and Festus came to Caesarean court, many of the Jews from Jerusalem were present there, and the Jews brought many serious charges against Paul.
Created using Powtoon.